I think a really exciting way to conclude this is to really connect the farm to the marketplace. We've really tried to focus primarily in this soil summit on the agronomics and what you can do with your soils to improve its structure, its chemistry, its microbial processes that support both of those, and what that all means for how you manage your farm and the return on investment that you get for the trees. And I think here we all have heard about soil carbon, the importance of sequestering carbon in the soils, and we hear a lot in the marketplace increasingly about whether it's soil carbon or regenerative ag or healthy soils. And this is our panel that kind of takes us beyond just the agronomic benefits of these practices and looks at other ways to get a return on investment for your operation and beyond. So really pleased to have with us today. You all have met Rory Crowley. He's now literally going to change his hat. I should get him one of his other hats to represent Project APIS-M, fantastic spin-off from the Almond Board of California and a great partner with us. Amelie Guadin, professor at UC Davis in soil ecology, and has really done some of the fundamental research that we've heard today with respect to the soil mycorrhizae and the benefits of cover crops and whole orchard recycling. And also somebody who's passionate about agriculture being part of the solution to global climate change, so hopefully she'll bring that up. And then Alan Burwell from Select Harvest, hopefully someone familiar here in the region, to really connect that to the marketplace and why Select Harvest is looking at these kinds of practices with their growers and what value that might add to continue the value proposition of almonds in the marketplace. So that is who will take us to the end today. So I'm going to start with Rory, because as you all know, the almond season starts with pollination. And one of the earlier panelists brought up this question around, if you grow a cover crop, what is that going to do for bees? Rory, if you could start us off by talking about that linkage and what Seeds for Bees program that you manage can offer to these growers.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, again. I don't know if you saw that, but a bee just landed on this flower right here, okay? I'm not kidding. It's a hornet, so I'm going to be careful. So my new job is the Director of Habitat Programs with Project APIS-M. And I manage our Seeds for Bees program. Billy Sink over here, who's now at Pollinator Partnership, bee guy for sure. Billy installed over 50,000 acres while he was here. He's my predecessor, and learned a lot from him. In fact, the first cover crop that I ever planted was a Project APIS-M cover crop at the Kitty Hawk Ranch, the same place that we did biosolarization, under his direction. So I'm filling some big shoes here. But yeah, so we started planting cover crop because of two reasons: soil health, and we wanted better bee productivity. We wanted to help the bees. So Project APIS-M started back in 2006, kind of at the height of colony collapse disorder, this hype that was kind of going on. And it wasn't hype, it was really a critical problem. And essentially, Dan Cummings, who's actually the current chair of Blue Diamond Growers, and another gal who worked at the Almond Board, Christy Hines, got together and said, we need to do something, because if we lose the bees, we lose our crop, we lose our livelihood. So enter Project APIS-M. Over the last however long, since 2006, I don't do math well, we've funded, this year we will go over $10 million worth of funded research for Apis mellifera and the problems that are there. And that is a huge, huge deal. A lot of that as well has come from the Almond Board of California. The Almond Board of California is also a big supporter of who we are and what we do. So really high-level overview. The Seeds for Bees program essentially tries to plant cover crops in the commercial agricultural setting to add diversity, duration, of available forage for bees. When there's not available forage, there, right, in the winter months. So our brassica mix, for example, has 3 different mustards, has daikon, and has canola. These are very early blooming varieties. They're there specifically, yes, to help you out with your soil, but in our mission is to add that diversity, that duration to these bees and their diet, right? I'm not a bee expert. I've only been here 90 days, but I see the critical importance of what Project Davis does. So from a very high level, we give growers free seed. If you come to us and you apply and you hit our criteria, which is a pretty low bar, if you could fog up a mirror, we're going to give you some seed, okay? We want to help you, and so our first year, we give you up to $2,000 worth of free seed. We have 5 different mixes to get you kind of going, right? That could be anywhere from 50 to 100 to 150 acres, depending on your swath, depending on how you plant, depending on all sorts of stuff. Our brassica mix is one of our most popular. We also have a soil builder mix, which is brassicas and clovers, I think. I'm still learning about all these things. So that's and what happens is in June, you guys come to us, you apply. Over the next 3 months, we look at those applications, and then we get seed out the door, and hopefully we're planting in the month of October, maybe into November, so that we have that available forage prior to something like the almond bloom, okay? So that's the Seed for Bees program. From a soil health perspective, man, it's been talked about all day. Just in terms of compaction, I mean, again, we could talk about it until we're blue in the face, but I think that's good where we're at, so.
Thanks. And maybe I'll just add, so that it's 100% clear, because we funded research to make sure to answer this question. When you do plant a cover crop that has blooming varieties in it, research shows that it does not compete with the almond blossom for bee visitations. But it also, research shows that orchards that have a flowering cover crop, those hives come out stronger than an orchard that doesn't. And research that economist at Davis is doing is really looking at the prevalence of better contract conditions that growers can achieve when they have a cover crop. So the contract that they have with a beekeeper or a bee broker for pollination services. There can be some additional advantages in that in the negotiation of your contract if you offer a blooming cover crop, because that helps the bees. So a lot of different advantages to layer on there. Amelie, I'm going to ask you a really open question, because you are passionate about this topic in so many different ways. And just talk about the value of soil carbon from whatever perspective you want.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. The value of soil carbon. This is a very open question. Well, soil carbon, first of all, to make it very simple, is the building block of soil health. There's no healthy soil without soil carbon. Soil carbon creates the habitat for microbes to live in, gives the energy for microbes to do their job, and microbes are central to building a healthy soil. So you're priming your soil, you're putting the resources, creating the habitat that is needed to build up soil carbon. So what we see are mainly 5 main benefits. The first one, direct linear correlation between soil carbon and compaction. The more carbon you have, the less compaction you have, okay? Aggregation, same way. More carbon, more aggregation, which leads to more infiltration of irrigation and precipitation water. And those are very, very linear and well-proven relationship in the soil literature. It's a bank of nutrients. And it keeps your nutrients in an organic form, meaning it will less be subjected to leaching, okay? So you have your nutrients that are tightly bound to the soil. You build your cation exchange capacity, so the capacity of your soil to bind some of those elements. It's the food and energy for microbes, so something very important I already mentioned, and then it helps retain water in the system. And here I want to caveat this, in that the literature is not so definitive about how much water retention we can get with percent increase of organic matter. And you see all those numbers going around, and I just want to be cautious that in our semi-arid climates, it might not pan out like in the Midwest. So we're busy getting you the data, but we have to be careful. We see improvements in infiltration, improvements in compaction, improvements in aggregation without improvement in water holding capacity, okay? We also see improvements without increasing carbon, and leaving roots for one season are going to go a long way in reducing compaction rates without increasing soil carbon quite yet, especially when we talk about orchards where sometimes we're at the remediation point of compaction. So, and finally, I mean, the last point that has been shown in the Midwest, and we're trying to show this in California, is a direct correlation between organic matter and yield under drought. You have less yield lag under drought in a corn-soybean system, mind you, when you have higher levels of organic matter. I don't know if it is true in California. One thing we see is that with whole orchard recycling, where we increase carbon level about 5 tons per acres, when you decrease your irrigation by 20% of ET, your tree is not going to feel it as much as a tree that is growing in a soil that is lower in organic matter. So we've tried those experiments, and of course whole orchard recycling, it's 30 tons of carbon coming in, 5 tons staying, okay? There's 15%, 10 to 15% of what you put in is going to stay. All of it is the rest of it is going to be respired back into the atmosphere, okay? It's a long-term handover to build up soil carbon. And then there's various pools of carbon. If you measure total carbon, it's not necessarily the carbon that is sequestered, okay? There's a labile fraction that is rapidly cycling and turning over in the soil, and then there's sequestered fraction on the minerals. And this is very small fraction, okay? So when we talk about carbon sequestration, we have to be careful because just a small fraction of this carbon is sequestered on the long term. And to be sequestered, on the long term, the cool thing is that it has to be cycled by microbes. It's the microbes' carcasses and what we call necromass that actually stays in the soil on the longer term. So very important to feed the biology. This is what is going to get you there in terms of carbon accumulation on the long term.
Do you want to talk about global climate change?
Yes.
Mitigating.
So let me talk about two practices. Whole orchard recycling, very effective practice for building up soil carbon. Okay, plus 5 tons per acre, proven benefits on many levels. We also document decrease in leaching, 57% less leaching of your fertilizer 9 years down the road after whole orchard recycling. So you're keeping those nutrients in the system, making them bioavailable to your crop. Carbon accruals with cover crops are going to take a long time. And you can see benefits without having those carbon accrual. 3 years of cover crop, and believe me, I don't want to say that. 3 years of cover crop, I don't see any increases in soil organic matters in my field. Okay? I don't want to say that, but this is the data. So we have to be careful in how much we pumped up cover crops in terms of carbon benefits. What's beneficial is stacking practices. Cover crops plus shell, plus compost, and then to be bold, if you add grazing, you're in a different ball game here in terms of soil biology. The soil is jazzed up, we see huge increases in soil organic matter and soil carbon storage with long-term grazing in perennials. So that's one strategy. In terms of climate change mitigation, I think agriculture has a big role to play in mitigating climate change because it's across such a big part of our landscape. We have a responsibility to mitigate climate change, and the largest sink of CO2 which we have in excess in the atmosphere is in the soil. There's no other larger, this is the largest sink that we have to sequester this carbon. And that creates co-benefits at the same time to move agriculture to adaptation and mitigation to climate change. So huge potentials there.
Over to you, Alan. Sorry. Sorry, I have to grab this giant thing. So Alan, you're a handler and you sit kind of in this in-between space between a grower and the marketplace. If you could talk a little bit from that perspective about what you see the market and where there's an opportunity for these kinds of practices to distinguish almonds in that marketplace.
Well, first of all, thanks for sticking around and thanks for putting this on Almond Board. It's been a long day, but it's been a great day of education and just learning. So Select Harvest, we're a handler, and I'm guessing most of you growers out there are familiar with the model, sending your product to a handler to market. And this is a really important step because you are experts at growing and maximizing your practices to get a good yield, but at the end of the day, you need a cash flow on that, and that's where the handler comes in. And Select Harvest, we're maybe a bit unique out there in the sense that we handle and we market to both pretty much everywhere. So we market to confectionery manufacturers. We ship overseas. We ship domestically. We also have a consumer brand. We package consumer product goods and sell them here domestically, as well as doing private labels. So we're marketing to not just your end consumers, but to your manufacturers who are ultimately getting out there to the end consumer. So what's really interesting, or what I'm trying to connect here is, okay, so now we've talked a lot about carbon sequestration. We just talked about responsibility for climate change and how we can impact that. But if you flip this script, it's not just a responsibility. It's actually a value add. It's something that can enhance the value of the crop that we're bringing. And if you don't believe me, I'll challenge you right now and pick up your phone and Google your favorite retailer or brand. Let's say it's maybe Amazon or Walmart, or I shop at Safeway in town, so it's an Albertsons. Google them. Google your favorite companies. Every single one of them is going to have relatively front and center, easy for you to find, their climate pledge, their impact pledge, how they're going to address climate change in some form of another. And oftentimes these companies are making very, very aggressive and very long-sighted pledges on having some type of improvement and impact on climate change. And so ask yourself, why? Well, I think we all know, intrinsically to some level, it's the consumer. The consumers are becoming much more aware and putting their dollars behind climate change and supporting companies and brands that make those types of pledges and bring products to market that have some type of impact and some type of story behind it that is meaningful. And we as marketers now have an opportunity to take this story. Think about all the great things that we have going on here. You have carbon sequestration. You have providing environment and forage for your bees. The consumers out there, right, they have this antiquated and totally out of touch understanding of what we do. They think we go out there and we rape and pillage, sorry for the French there, but we go out here and we just take and take and take and we don't bring anything back, and that is totally incorrect. And we now have an opportunity to flip that script and tell this wonderful story of all the benefits that we're bringing to the table that help this holistic approach to the environment, and it has real value in the marketplace. Because if you're a retailer or a manufacturer trying to bring your products to the market and you're trying to be relevant to these consumers that now want they want that climate responsibility behind the products that they're buying, well, if you're a supplier or a manufacturer, how are you going to meet those goals? Well, we as a handler, we as growers now have that opportunity to raise our hand and say, well, we have some solutions for you. We're doing carbon sequestration. We're doing these regenerative ag practices. We're doing bee-friendly farming, right? Our program here, we've to give a shout out to a Pollinator partnership, we're now implementing bee-friendly farming and certifications on our orchards and beginning to work with our growers to do that. because that's a real tangible piece that we can bring that is relevant to the consumer, that brings us all together. That's a really concise and easy way to tell that story. So the growers and the handlers that can come together, be concise in that story and be compelling in that story are going to be the ones that are ultimately going to be successful, and that's the answer that we're trying to come up with.
Thanks. So you've all we've spent the whole day hearing about different benefits to the soils of different practices and some really compelling data, some great research to back that up, as well as grower experience. And you all work directly with growers in one fashion or another. And I wonder if you could each kind of reflect on what are some of the pieces of information that either really click with a grower and get them over the hump of trying something new, or where maybe there's a barrier. I mean, that barrier might be something we don't know yet, or it might be something that is lose my tongue-tied after a long day. Might be sort of common knowledge that may or may not be backed up by evidence. That really is a hurdle that we have to get over, because we're always looking for ways to better communicate and help growers see the upside of some of these opportunities, even though there's maybe some risk in changing the practice. So in each of your areas, it might be from a market perspective, from research, or in the area of pollinators, where are some of those things that really click, or maybe there's a barrier. I'm going to start this direction this time.
All right, well, the marketer first. I mean, for anything that we do from a sustainability standpoint, it has to be sustainable for the business, and that includes the grower first and foremost. And then it becomes, well, what else can we talk about that addresses the consumer's needs to be relevant in the climate change conversation? So, I mean, I'm just going to start there, right? Anything that we do, that's always first and foremost. But then when I talk to growers and I'm out there trying to tell our story from a marketing perspective, I think the thing that I've learned is we already have a really great story to tell. It doesn't necessarily matter if you're doing one thing or another, because you're probably doing something that is relevant in this climate change and sustainability conversation. And if you're doing anything that we talked about here, you absolutely are. And so part of it is really more about being confident in what we have and understanding that what we're doing really does bring that extra value to the consumer. And the more that we can work together to understand the practices that we're doing across the board, because I'm assuming that, like, from our perspective as a handler, we don't just work with one grower. We work with, I think we're up to about 120, 130 different growers. And it does become difficult to have a consensus and easy, concise conversation and story to tell, but it is there, and it shouldn't stop us from doing that. So it's more about opening that line of communication and being open to the conversations rather than, from my perspective anyways, rather than like adopting a specific practice or not, because there is still that story to tell.
So what clicked? I think it's different for each grower and where you are in the valley, and the narrative for why you would be interested in cover crops or other regenerative practices really depends on your management practices, the age of your orchards, where you're located, etc. But in general, it's growers looking for solutions to perennial problems that sometimes there's no more short-term fixes for it. I've had growers reaching out because they're about to turn apart an orchard because water does not infiltrate anymore. They've deep ripped, they've put gypsum, they've done all of the things, and it's not working anymore. And a little bit of living roots in the system can actually go a long way. So for us, the conversation has started with a problem that is not easy to fix, and where some of the soil-based solutions can really help. Compaction, salinity, infiltration of water, I mean, those are problems that are ubiquitous across the valley, and an entry point for a lot of the conversations we've had. I think in terms of barriers, water is definitely in the center of everything we're talking about, and we don't have good data. So what we're trying to do is team up with hydrologists. And we have, thanks to the Almond Board, General Mills talking about markets, helping our research and funding our research to try to identify what is the water footprints of cover crops. Do you gain water? If so, how much? How much is lost by evaporation, evapotranspiration, and trying to do those mass balances from Arvin, Burkersfield, to Chico, because we're talking about very, very different zones here. So that's really one node of information that it's on everyone's mind and that we are behind. We are behind because water has been plentiful and it's not anymore. And we have very limited time to think about groundwater recharge. Groundwater recharge is also at the center of what we're talking about. How can healthy soil help recharge our groundwater with water of better quality and in larger quantity, and using our orchards for recharge events? Those are some critical pieces of information we're working on right now.
Well, you stole my fire. I was going to say water. Water's kind of like both a benefit and a barrier, because we really don't know how it works in our systems. And so, but we're getting there. And the reference here by Dr. Guadin was that, you know, we have a really good study that looked at winter cover crops with water from Arvin to Chico and basically said, hey, here's some more questions about water, right? I'm going to answer this by from the grower hat and then the grower hat. When I first started thinking about soil health practices, cover crops, biosolarization, pheromone puffers, you name it, I came up, well, I don't know if I came up, it was a motto that just came to my head, and it was, when you put life into the soil, you get life out. And the opposite is also true in my experience. So when we're sterilizing under the tree, you know, we have to because that's the system. We put life in, we get life out. I have seen that time and time and time and time and time again reign true in our orchards. I also want to ask a question. We're all tired, it's the end of the day, and I want some interaction here. Here's the question. What is the farmer's greatest resource? What is it? Okay, we got soil, what else? Ooh, close, in my opinion. What was it? Ingenuity. Close, okay. It's not, stupidity. Doing biosolarization, right? In my opinion, I've said this for years, and it's also reigned true. The farmer's greatest resource is his or her ability to adapt. Daniel said it. To adapt to changing market conditions, to adapt to $750 a ton UN32, to adapt to dust bowls, to adapt to flooding the Nile, to adapt, right? We have done it for millennia. We have adapted. And this gal right here, in the last talk that I was with her, she said, an entire consortium of scientists have told us for years that we cannot farm the way we are farming. And that is true. And guess what? We're going to feel it this year, aren't we? We're already feeling it this year. So we go back to adaptability. It's not the water. It's not the soil. It's adaptability. It is our ability to overcome and adapt. That's all I got.
We are starting strong, or ending strong today. Well, I was going to ask you kind of as a wrap-up before going to the audience, since this is the last panel, sort of where you'd want to see this topic or your area of work go in the future. Might be some questions that we're still trying to answer, might be some tools that we need to get broader adoption, could be the vision for soil management in almonds. I think you've all started to touch upon that, but I'll just leave you with that as a last question, then love to hear from the audience. This is our last opportunity to get your input. What questions are on your mind? I'd almost ask you the same question. What are the questions that you might leave today that we haven't answered? Maybe there will be a Soil Summit 2.0, but I'll first start with the panel. What is your vision for where you'd like to go next?
So from a marketing perspective, one of the reasons I touched on bee-friendly farming is I think that's definitely a point of differentiation that we can use to talk about where we go next. And the reason is again, consumers, if you look at who's eating the products, why they're eating them, and what they want from us, consumers are lazy and simple. They want to just look at a package and they want to feel good about it. So when we have a message to them about how their product impacts climate change or sustainability on the whole, having something like a bee-friendly farming badge, or if you take a step back, the Project Non-GMO Verified, right? There's a reason that those pieces exist, because it's a real easy, simple communication tool for the consumer to understand a broader story. And if they want the in-depth, in the weeds version of that, they can go and get it. But most of them don't actually want that. But at the same time, they don't trust the brands, they don't trust the corporations, they don't trust the product themselves. They like having a third party to verify that, yes, this is true. So they're very skeptical as well. So if we look forward, finding those little nuggets of easy ways for us to communicate that, whether it's a way to quantify carbon sequestration or carbon emissions or being friendly to the bees, those are things that I think are going to really help us tell the story of what we're actually doing on the ground without getting too complicated. And we spend a whole day here talking about all these things and getting into the weeds, and that's great. We need to do that. We need to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it, but the consumer doesn't. The consumer doesn't care. They just want to know that what they're buying isn't exacerbating the situation and ideally helping improve and get them further along into helping what we need to help with, and that's the climate change component.
Well, to put it very simply, what I'm busy with is quantifying what's in it for you. How the soil health is going to help you. Cut on the inputs, farming a changing climate, and give you the information, resources, and data so you can optimize your management accordingly. That's it. That's what I'm that's what I'm up to.
Sounds like we're going to have a long-term partnership on this.
Man, big question. I've thought about this. Yeah, I've thought about this for 7 years. Okay, since I started. And this is controversial. Like bee-friendly farming for some people is controversial. What? Are you kidding me? Being good to the bees is controversial? Yeah. 1/3 of our food comes from a pollinated, crop, honeybee pollinated crop. All right, I'll digress on that. I think I'm going to be bold and say the almond industry has to environmentalize itself. It has to change and change big time. And it's going to be forced to change through regulation. It's going to be forced to change because of our resource management. And some of these early adopters, like Dan, right? Some other guys and gals in this room, they're already on it. They're already saving their water. They're already getting bigger yields, right? They're on it. So we have to think dynamically about that change, and we have to be willing to move in that direction. A perfect example of this is the rice industry, okay? Waterfowl in the Pacific Flyway. And now they're getting salmon involved. Have you heard about it? Google it. Rice is good for birds. Rice is good for salmon coming up the sack. Almonds need to be good for bees. 2 years ago, National Geographic did, if you could save one creature in the world, what would it be? It's pole. Above elephants, above tigers, above you name it.
Panda bears.
Above panda bears. The North American honeybee vastly outcompeted in this poll. People love bees. The almond industry needs to environmentalize itself. That's it.
All right, we'll open it up to comments or questions from the audience. You've heard a lot today. Matt. Yeah, so the question of quantification specifically as it relates to carbon footprint, so greenhouse gas emission reductions and carbon sequestration. Well, I'll take a little stab at it, and then I'll see if anyone on the panel wants to add. Well, one thing the Almond Board does is we fund research to get reputable data on what the carbon sequestration benefits are. Amelie cited that from Whole Orchard Recycling. It is published and holds a lot of credibility for that practice, and she is working on the question of carbon sequestration with cover crops, for example. So research plays a role in bringing credibility to claims. And right now we have a potential proposal for a climate smart almonds commodity program to the U.S. Department of Agriculture that may make more tools available to growers. I think the important thing in this area is to realize that the value of what you do with respect to reducing greenhouse gas emissions or sequestering carbon isn't narrowly defined by carbon credits. Sometimes it's defined by the evidence behind the stories of what you do on the farm. That's something I think Alan is made reference to, and we have a reputation management and marketing program where we're starting to bring those stories to the forefront, backed by good peer-reviewed research. And increasingly, we're starting to see in the food industry, as Alan mentioned, name a food company, probably every single one of them has a climate commitment. And increasingly, those companies are looking at how in their supply chain, not by going to carbon markets, but working with the companies and the growers in their supply chain, how can they take and incentivize benefits down to the farm level that reduce the carbon footprint of the product that they deliver to the consumers. And that's often what's called insetting now. So they're not necessarily buying carbon offsets, but they're working with their supply chain to get those reductions and to get the credit and communicate that to the consumer. So those are some short answers to that, but definitely an area that we have some investments and perhaps we'll be doing more in the future. But I don't know if any of the panelists want to add to that.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question because it's an extraordinarily difficult one to answer from my perspective. It's hard. Particularly when you understand the handler model, right? Because to reference the running joke of the day, it depends. And it depends from a grower perspective. So when you as a handler are working with 100+ different growers, we might have a really great solution for quantifying what you're doing, but I don't have one for over here. So most of these programs, take organic as an example. If I want to sell an organic almond, all of my all my growers have to be supplying me organic almonds, or I have to have a way to segregate them, and it's impossible. And so anytime you get into, again, carbon sequestration or quantifying these things, oftentimes I'm having, as a handler, to quantify them from individual growers, and that's impossible. We can't do it that way. We lose all efficiencies. So I think Rory has already answered this question when you talk about the industry environmentalizing itself. Finding those things that we as an industry can latch on and say we are good for bees is a really great example, because that's a real easy story to tell, and it doesn't matter where we're marketing the almonds. If you pick up an almond, you can feel good about it because it's good for bees. And if we can continue to tell and develop this story on regenerative ag, that it's good for the soil, it's good for carbon sequestration. If we have a general way to define that and talk about that, I think that's going to be a really great step for us in our ability to market and to address the needs of our consumers that want something that addresses climate change.
I've been thinking about this other question, which is this question. Like no other practice, cover crops have the very unique ability, and although there's a lot of questions that we still have, especially as it relates to California Central Valley and not a Midwest system about cover crops, we are trying to figure it all out. But cover crop has the very unique ability to hit 4 critical areas in sustainability, okay? Water, we'll just call it infiltration, water quality, okay? Apart from other things, water use efficiency, all this other stuff. Greenhouse gas emission reduction, we know how to quantify that. We have technology to quantify that. Carbon, open question, but still, right? And bees. Like no other sustainable climate smart ag practice, cover crop hits those 4 areas. Maybe no-till is this or that, or the pollination end is huge, but 4 areas, right? That's why I'm so all about cover crop. And I will say that the state government is getting on board with all of these things in multiple ways. Can't say how, I'm not going to, but I think we're going to see some pretty drastic change in the next 3 to 5 years for us farmers out there trying to make it happen. That's all I'll say.
All right, I think we will end there on that great note.